Hey guys, welcome back to The Grey Escape. I have a fantastic guest on today's episode. Couldn't be more thrilled. Tell you more about it right after this. Hello and welcome back. So before we get into the show, if you guys have any international money conversions that you need to do, sending your funds overseas, traveling, and you need to convert money and you want a great currency exchange online, look no further than thegreyescape.com/cash, and you will see my awesome sponsor who I found. They weren't sponsoring me. I did international money transfers, and I was so thrilled after researching and going through the whole PayPal thing and seeing how much money you lose and all of these currency conversion travel agencies. This was a great find. It saved me a ton of money. And the best part is, just for listening to this show, if you go to my website, you can get an international money transfer for free worth up to £500, which is nothing to sniff at. So there you go, thegreyescape.com/cash. Now, today's guest. I am thrilled to finally bring you this interview with Maria Wheatley, because we met up quite a while ago when I was in the UK. And, you know, there's been a hiatus in my show, which I talked about in the last couple of episodes. Well, I met up with Maria at her home in Marlborough, which is in the UK. It sounds so American and full of nicotine, but it's a beautiful, quaint town, not far at all from Avebury, which is the largest standing stone circle in the world, although you've probably heard more about Stonehenge, but Avebury's bigger, so there. Well, Maria is an author, prolific author, and an expert on said stone circles and other things. She's a master dowser, as was her father. She knows a ton of stuff. She's an almanac on my favorite topic, frequencies and vibrations. So we're going to talk about some really cool stuff, like, could our ancestors hear the stones? Did they use them for healing? How did they move them? So if you want to understand more about how our ancient ancestors may have understood the metaphysical and physical properties of pyramids and stone circles, then boy, are you in the right place. So get those ears ready to receive the oncoming frequencies and vibrations with the wonderful, charming, and massively knowledgeable Maria Wheatley.
Acoustics is something I'm specifically actually very interested in from my experience. I basically had like a near-death experience in 2012, and I received information that changed my whole life. I wasn't into anything, and overnight I received the information about everything's an illusion. It's all our perception of an infinite range of frequencies and vibrations. And music is the key. Everything is sound and vibration, and music is the key. And so part of my own path of research has been acoustics. So maybe that's a good diving in point for how what you do plays into that genre of acoustics.
Yes, well, we look at the frequencies of earth energies, the frequencies of water, and the frequencies of ancient sites to try and understand what earth energies are. So I tend to look at the kind of sound frequencies through particular earth flows through the earth. And by earth flows, what I mean is you have earth energies that flow through the earth like rivers. Then you have energy lines that flow above the ground. It's aerial energy, which can flow in a straight line. And this was all kind of dowsing law. And so what I wanted to do is I wanted to check with equipment whether these so-called energy bands of stones that we'll discuss in a moment, or earth energies at places like Stonehenge, was actually real. So that's where we started to look into the frequencies of them, and we got some very interesting results.
What kind of equipment were you using to assess the frequencies?
The first lot of equipment was used by Rodney Hale, and he used an electromagnetic sensing device set up to a laptop. The second lot of electronic equipment we used was a spectrum analyzer that can pick out particular frequencies, and an ionization device, and another magnetic sensing device. All very expensive, £10,000 worth.
Wow. And what kind of stuff was it showing then, the equipment?
What it was showing, when we look at Earth energy currents, and imagine this is like a big river of Earth energy, that's the best way to visualize this type of Earth energy. We decided at Avebury Henge, which is the world's largest stone circle in Wiltshire and a love of mine, we went to Avebury and we thought, well, what we'll do is this is where in England the two currents come together as one. You've got a male current and a female current. So you've got these two massive rivers of Earth energy. One is male and one is female. They're called Mary and Michael, and they were discovered by Hamish Miller and Paul Broadhurst in the 1980s. They plotted them throughout their flows throughout southern England. Now at Avebury, they come together as one, as an alchemic marriage, and flow right the way through the centre of the two stone circles. So I said to Rodney, this would be a great place to test for the frequencies of the currents. So he made a massive copper device. It contained very long, fine-tuned copper probes that could be sunk into the Earth energy current, and then a control was done just outside. So you had a control and you had the actual point going down. Well, it blew the equipment.
Oh, wow.
It just went, then Rodney said, we've got to set it all up again. And it's very time-consuming by what I mean setting up, So we did it again and it blew the equipment. And I suddenly thought it's too strong. The two Earth energy currents flowing together are too strong. Let's go for the traditionally more milder Earth current called Mary, and let's put the probes in and see what we get. So we did that and we got the frequencies. We got 3 anomalous frequencies flowing through that exactly where that current is. And the controls either side showed no electromagnetic signals whatsoever. Now, I was doing a series of lectures in about, I think it was 2013 or 2014. Where does time go? It was one of those years. And Dr. Sam from the Bosnian Pyramids happened to be given a lecture. And I was listening to his lecture. And he was saying that one of the frequencies for levitation that he thought, through his own research, was around about 25 hertz. And my ears literally pricked up then, because I thought that was one of the main frequencies flowing through the centre of the Mary current, 25 hertz.
You said levitation.
That's
a
according to Dr.
frequency
Sam.
for levitation.
That's according to his research.
Levitation. So if we were vibrating ourselves at 25 hertz, are you saying we would float?
I don't fully understand his work, to be truthful. He just said that, and I asked him after his lecture, was that accurate? Had he done any experiments? And he said there were experiments done, and that seemed to be the frequency of levitation. What I noticed, if indeed Dr. Sam is correct, what I noticed was the Earth current flows, if we look at them through South England, flow through every single megalithic site. And what I thought could have been happening in the ancient world was the ancient ancestors looked at these Earth frequencies, maybe for a mystical point of view, a healing point of view, but perhaps for a practical point of view to help assist levitation of the stones.
Well, how come it seems rather obvious to do an experiment on this, to try levitating something at 25 hertz. I actually read when I was researching a few weeks ago, I stumbled upon a NASA document that's publicly available that says how NASA has done experiments in levitation. And bizarrely, the thing that blew my mind, besides the fact that levitation experiments were happening, which is pretty cool, I must say, but the thing that they were levitating was pharmaceuticals. And that just
That's
really,
extraordinary.
yeah, that came at me like a 180. Like that wouldn't be my first thought if I was, levitating things without to levitate drugs, So I'm not quite sure what that application would be for. It kind of makes your mind run amok a bit there, having drugs floating around. I just don't know. But that's a publicly available document by NASA on levitation. So we know some experiments are done, but I can't believe, you don't know anybody who's doing then other experiments, who's trying to float rocks?
What I would love to do is for somebody to get in touch with me, because I can show exactly where these currents are on the different frequencies. I can show them through the means of dowsing, through the means of maps, and through actually showing exactly where that is in the ground. So I would love somebody to come along, because I like to put things to the test. I don't have a belief system about ancient sites. People look at me and they think I have a belief system that, it's all real. In fact, the more that I have been studying, I've been studying earth energies for over 25 years, the more time goes on, the more cynical I actually become, because I want to prove it. I don't have a belief system about ley lines. I don't have any preconceived idea until I go into the field, so to speak. So I think our ancient ancestors were fully aware of different types of frequencies. Another frequency of interest that we noticed, and this was with Rodney Hale and David Webb, what we notice about standing stones, for example, I got taught to dowse by my late father. He was considered a master dowser of the UK. He taught most people in dowsing societies now how to dowse. And he always claimed that if you put a standing stone, like at Avebury, like at Stonehenge or Boscawen or Stanton Drew, wherever these sites are, if you put a standing stone rooted into an earth energy current, something truly magical begins to happen. It's almost like the crystal matrix that makes up the standing stone's internal makeup, which is very, very similar, incidentally, to a microchip made in Silicon Valley. There isn't too much difference between the crystal structures on the inside. Put the standing stone into an earth energy current, like I just described, so-called Mary and Michael, or underground water river that flows through the ground, or a ley, root it into that, and it starts to absorb the earth energy into these kind of bands, particular areas on the stones. If you could visualize a standing stone and then just have 5 above ground bands.
Kind of like chakras.
Yeah, I've always likened them to chakras, because there's actually 7. 2 are rooted in the ground, because the stone obviously has a part underground and the rest is above ground. Well, when we tested them, because I was with Rodney Hale, he'd worked with other authors like Paul Devereux on the Dragon Project back in the 70s. And I said to him, come to Avebury Henge to meet me, Rodney, and I want to find out whether these bands that my late father used to say were happening on the standing stones are real or not. I'm going to douse them first, then could you bring some equipment to see if they're actually emitting a signal? He actually laughed and said, look, if that had been found, we would have found it on the Dragon Project. And I said, but Rodney, you weren't looking for that. You were looking for other anomalies. You weren't looking for megalithic energy or earth energy, which is my forte. Come out, I'll buy you some beers and I'll buy you a meal. Please do this. And he came out and he was staggered, because exactly where the dowsing claimed that the bands were, he was getting the electromagnetic signals and nowhere else on the stone.
And is this the guy with the 10 grand of equipment?
That's Rodney Hale. David Webb has the very expensive equipment, but Rodney has equally expensive equipment. It was very sophisticated, these tests. And what we found was on one particular part of the stone, it was releasing a frequency around about 18 hertz. Now, we hear at 20. And I thought perhaps our ancient ancestors had a different perception of stone circles. We're very visual. We're used to looking at the internet, where we look around. We're constantly seeing our reflections. Everything is quite visual. I think in the ancient world, they had better hearing, possibly because less pollution, more attuned to nature, to sound. And I think they could possibly hear the sounds of the stones as well as see them.
Wow. I just got goosebumps, because when I had my experience, the information that came obviously so pertained to sound, which is why it's such a big area of my research. But it said music is the key. And literally the information I received was sort of energetically, it was like I just knew stuff in a split second. And I had this sense that a sound would be able to bring the planet to peace. Literally a sound frequency, it would just adjust everybody's state of being, that they would not feel like killing their fellow man. So I just got goosebumps when you said that 18 hertz frequency. I mean, what if a frequency like that was some sort of peacekeeping frequency?
Well, exactly. We should think about stone circles from not what we see today. We need to kind of try and think what our ancient ancestors were like. Who were these people? You know, what was important to them? Because the monuments that they left behind are so fantastic, like the pyramids, like Stonehenge, that we lose sight of the people and their experience of ancient sites.
Now, these guys that found these lines of energy, you said that they were only discovered in the 80s?
Yes, in southern England, Hamish Miller and Paul Broadhurst, and I know Hamish quite well, being from a dowsing family, and he forwarded my book as well on Avebury. Yeah, they found them in the 1980s, quite by happy chance, because there was a very famous geomancer and author called John Michell. Sadly, he passed over a few years ago, and he wrote some seminal books on geomancy, sacred geometry, and the like.
What exactly is geomancy?
Geomancy means earth divination. Mancy's divination, geo-earth.
Okay.
So it means earth divination in its truest sense.
So kind of like getting a tarot reading from the planet.
Geomancy has become to be known more like the Chinese feng shui.
Oh.
Or it can be the kind of sacred patterns that are put into churches and stone circles, the geometry. That all comes under geomancy today as a big umbrella. So John Michell, he was a forerunner of geomancy. And he said to Hamish and Paul, look, guys, there's a massive lathe that goes through England. It starts off at Carnlough in Cornwall. It's called the St. Michael Lathe, and it flows all the way to Hopton on the Norfolk coast. It's 300 miles long. And Avebury Henge, which I mentioned earlier, is the largest stone circle in the world, was at the exact centre of that lathe. Now, what Hamish and Paul thought they'd get is a kind of narrowing line, and then a line getting wider and narrower, or maybe stronger in places and weaker in places. But what they found was that lay is a carrier line for two currents that entwine it. Are we all familiar with the symbol of the caduceus?
Is that what you see as the medical symbol with...
That's
is it
right.
Now, refresh my memory, I haven't looked at it. I know there's something to do with snakes winding up it, which I've heard can also symbolize our DNA. And is it actually a cross that they're going up? What are
It's
they?
like a long line.
Okay.
Imagine a long line with two serpents entwining it, and the line has wings at the top. That's normally how a caduceus symbol, and it does represent medical and medicinal things today. Modern day paramedics wear the caduceus symbol on their uniform. But if we imagine that symbol is like a lay with the line and the two currents entwine it are like two serpentine forces, that's what you're seeing in the land. It's a lay system. And those two earth currents is what Hamish and Paul discovered entwining the lay. But this had been documented in 2200 BC, contemporary to Avebury's heyday, in ancient China. So the ancient feng shui masters in China had names for these. Obviously, they didn't call them Mary and Michael. That's very Christianized
Well, I was going to say, it seems a little biased.
It's very Christianized. And incidentally, the reason why they got their Christian names is because that Hamish discovered every 10 kilometres or so on the male earth current that entwines the lay, a church was dedicated to either St. George or St. Michael. And on the Mary line, well, guess what? There was churches every, again, 5 to 10 kilometres dedicated to Mary Magdalene or the Virgin Mary. That's why they were called Mary and Michael.
So it wasn't that he was a super religious Christian guy. He just was observing the placement of these churches along the points. And you said the Chinese, it had already been documented. Did you say 2200 years BC?
2200 BC. It was documented by a very famous emperor that was a dowser. Now, they wouldn't look at Mary and Michael. They would say that the male current is the green dragon and the female current has equal power. It's not like a Mother Mary figure in ancient China. It's white tiger. So the female in China is considered very powerful earth energy, whereas over here, you conjure up the name Mary, Mother Mary, and you see more of a meeker force. Not so in ancient China. So they documented all of this. In fact, it's said through oral tradition in ancient China that the whole topography of China was changed. Very sharp mountain peaks were made softer so that the earth energy flows could flow harmonious through all of China, bringing a peace and harmony to the nation.
How would they do that? How can you smooth a mountain unless there's some glacier that's going over it and we're talking thousands and thousands of years? Is it referring to something like that, or is it implying man did this?
It's implying that man did it. He would alter river courses.
Wow.
You see, and when the colonial English Victorian Railroad companies went into China and Hong Kong, the geomancers there, the feng shui masters, were thrown into abject horror because they would say, I'm putting a railway line through, and they say through a certain area. Oh. No, you can't do that. You will amputate white tiger and it will bring sorrow. But they did. And they said, we're going to put a railway line through here and we're going to build a community here and we're going to call it Happy Valley in Hong Kong. Well, they knew, the Chinese geomancers, that ruin would follow. And 5 or so years passed and everybody was happy in Happy Valley. But time came to pass and then malaria hit the people. Wow. It was plagued by insects. Today, that place is for prostitutes, drugs. So
for some people, it's Happy Valley.
For some people, it's definitely Happy Valley. Yeah. For others, not so.
Right. You can just imagine the Brits going over and hearing this. Oh, you're going to disrupt white tiger. Like, right. Bring the gear. You know, I mean, you can just imagine how they would receive information like that. So when you say it's documented, do you mean you don't mean specifically the one by Avebury?
Not Avebury.
You just mean other instances of this on the planet.
Their equivalents in ancient China were documented. Okay. And you see, the ruling emperor at the time, would want to know where the male and female energy currents crossed, because where they crossed is a place of special holy sanctity, reserved for the emperor's palace, because it said to give long life, or for the person to be buried upon. Because in ancient China, it's very, very important where you bury yourself, or your people would place you in the ground, because it's believed that if you go on these earth currents, your lineage, you will live on, your dynasty.
You'll literally be in the energies of the planet.
In the energies of the planet. Now, it's very interesting when you start to look at how the past queens, the royal bloodline of Europe, places themselves in places like Westminster Abbey. They always locate these energy lines.
Wow. And are the pyramids, are they on these energy lines by any chance?
Absolutely. The places, all ancient sites are incorporated into either a ley system that could be global, localized. They have earth currents. And another feature is always particular types of underground water. So the pyramids are, everything is linked. If we look at our own bodies, Gaia is no different. Mother Earth is no different. We have arteries and veins linking into vital organs. That's how the energy system of leys and earth currents are. They're vital flow systems that continually are in movement and flux. Right. Just like our blood is in movement and in flux, isn't it? Nothing is stationary. It's the same for the earth currents. The only time that they become still and quiet, it's when it's an eclipse. Then everything goes quiet in Mother Earth's body and energy system, and then it reboots up.
Really?
About half an hour later.
So in an eclipse, those wavy lines, like the serpents on the caduceus, they don't wave during that time?
No, they go very quiet and very still. So Mother Earth is responding to celestial events. And the Earth energy system recognizes that. And dowsers were a part of a massive experiment, of which I was a part of, in 1999, where England had a total eclipse, which was a rare event in Cornwall on the line of totality. And it was our job to do dowsing to see how these Earth energy currents would respond. And they went still.
Wow. Holy smoke. And do we know an estimate of how many of these lines are around the planet, with the wavy ones going in a straight direction? I mean, are they all over the place, or are there literally just a handful of them?
I think they're quite common, actually. There's three sort of major systems that are known in England. There's the Mary and Michael system, there's the Ellen and Belinus system, and there's probably a Peter and Caroline system.
Peter and Caroline?
Well,
it sounds like people on a date. How did they get those names?
I think it's Catherine, actually, not
Catherine.
Caroline. Yeah, Peter and Catherine. It's mainly the churches that are lined upon them. If the church is dedicated to a particular saint or something, the earth currents take their names from them, except for Ellen and Belinus, discovered by Gary Biltcliffe and Caroline Hall.
But what's weird is there seems to be this period of missing information, because if people built these churches every 10 miles where these male and female energies intersect, then they obviously knew that it was going on, because it would be beyond coincidence that there would happen to be a church every 10 miles over the intersection of the male and energy lines. So how come it's only then rediscovered in the 1980s? Like, where did that knowledge go, that this wasn't normal, everyday knowledge of, oh, hey, let's build something. Well, make sure you douse and get the right energy for where you're building your new shop or something, you know. Where did that knowledge go, that it was rediscovered in the 80s?
Exactly. What I think happened was that the Bronze Age astronomer priests that located sites such as Avebury and Stonehenge, etc., they handed their information down to the Druids, because the Iron Age Druids of the UK placed their hill forts and their temple spaces above the very similar energy currents, whether it's a male or female or a crossing point or a lay. They used the same system. Then when we look to very old churches dating back to the Norman period and the Templar period, you find the same thing again. So it seems that the Druid tradition was probably handed down to the Knights Templar. And then from the Knights Templar, it was probably handed down to the Masonic Brotherhood, because when you start to look at Masonic temple spaces, lodges, churches designed by the Templars, they incorporate the same energy system. So I don't think it was lost. I think it was kept in under wraps with the Masons and with the Victorian mystery schools.
Right.
For sure.
I mean, it's funny because of the last episodes were with Crichton Miller, who goes into great detail of this encoded knowledge that's been hidden, not for, I don't think, a bad purpose. He talks about the Freemasons and how that they're basically guarding the knowledge so that it doesn't get lost, and how the pyramids were built encoding literally the geometry of our planet and the solar system that we're in with all the dimensions. So I'm just wondering, though, the actual disappearance of it, would this have been when people started to like burn witches? And I mean, would they have been killing people to wipe out the public knowledge of this? Because I mean, at some point there had to be just one day the public knew all this stuff and understood why buildings were being built. And then all of a sudden this isn't public knowledge anymore.
Well, first of all, I'd like to address, I don't necessarily disagree with Crichton's work at all. But I don't think it was all good by the Masonic Brotherhood at all. Why? The evidence is in the Victorian placement of prisons and the Victorian placement of orphanages. There's certain energy lines, you see. I mean, we're talking about good energy lines. The dragon current, the tiger current, they're good. They're good for your physical body. They're good for your mind, and they're good for your spirit. But there's certain energy currents that aren't good, and they can induce paranoia and upset. And it's either a very happy coincidence that the Masons put some of the orphanages in the Victorian period and particular buildings called blind houses over very negative energy sources. So I don't think they were using it all for good. I think it's just like any community. You're going to have good and you're going to have bad. Yeah. So I'd like to clarify that point. And I think today the system is still being manipulated with the placement of some organizations, but that's another story. When we have a look at how it was documented in ancient England, the understanding of the earth currents, it was always thought that it was in the 1920s. It was rediscovered by a chap called Alfred Watkins, who even coined the phrase ley line. It was him. It all goes back to the 1920s. So a lot of Earth mystery researchers think, it goes back to Alfred Watkins. But in my own research, I noted that one of the first documentations in England of the energy system was Dr. John Dee, the Elizabethan astrologer and occultist to Queen Elizabeth I. Now, he wrote in his book, Mathematical Preface, that there were immortal beams of energy currents and lines that went throughout the countryside, above the dale and in the valleys.
Wow.
And he said, and it gives you power in both your words and in your work.
Wow.
So it goes back some time. So I actually don't think it went underground as such. I think it was being used by the royals, and it was being used by particular people, for good or for bad.
But if, for starters, how old was Queen Elizabeth I when she died? Because, if he's saying there's an immortal power that you can have access...
in the ground, meaning it will never die. He thought the immortal beams were energies in
for the
earth,
planet.
Well, just a part of Gaia. They were always there.
But this wasn't something that he was saying that humans could tap into. Okay.
Not at all. He was saying that there's an energy system that he called immortal.
Wow.
So, which Gaia is? When we think of her age, she's 4 billion years old. If that isn't immortal to our mere 70, 80, 90 years, I don't know what is. So I think he was thinking about it in those terms. But nonetheless, he was looking for those energy currents to give them power in their words and in their works. So I think they were using the energy system. They were manipulating it for their own agenda, whatever their agenda was. And I think that's what's being used in modern day geomancy.
What sort of things, you say he was an occultist, which I believe that word occult actually just means hidden, right? So it's got quite a bit of negative connotation to it. It's a little bit scary to a lot of people, the word occult. I think even my own perception when I first heard the word, I think of like satanic rituals and stuff like this. But if you just say, well, it's actually just hidden knowledge, what kind of things would somebody like that gentleman have been telling Queen Elizabeth I? Queen Elizabeth I. What information would somebody like that be employed to give?
Finding the right locations to build buildings. There was a big building program in the Elizabethan period. So I would imagine that someone like Dr. John Dee would look into the right placement for particular houses. He would look into the placement of where to build things. Because the Masons, when they look at the Earth energy system, they used to be employed not just as a kind of society, but they would look to England's fertility, and they would locate the barns, town halls. All the important buildings were looked at for particular placements by the Masons. And Dr. John Dee, I would presume, would be doing that for Queen Elizabeth I. He also went to Prague with where there was a ruler there who was into the occult. And that shouldn't be a word that anyone should be frightened of, like you explained. It just means the unknown. It's somebody that's searching for answers, searching after the meaning of life, the universe and everything. That's what an occultist does. There was an occult king called Rudolph II, and Dr. John Dee went to Prague because it was a place where it thrived on astrology, it thrived on earth energies, whereas over here it was deemed witchcraft. And, you would be a heretic and you'd face an awful penalty, sometimes your own life, if you were caught mixing or dabbling, as they used to say, with the occult. Not so in the Czech Republic, the old lands of Bohemia. And the Bohemian kings supported knowledge because that's what they were looking for, knowledge. And Dr. John Dee went to study alchemy, for instance, in Prague.
Wow. So are you saying while we were burning our women who just happened to be good with herbs in England, that they weren't doing that in Europe? Or were there still parts of Europe where any kind of knowledge like that was severely punished?
There were parts of Europe. Rudolph II of Prague, he was very open-minded. And in the Elizabethan period, it wasn't too much of witch burning then. That came under James I in about the 1600s, because James I had a dream that one of his ships was going to be ruined, and it was the reason behind that ruin of his ship and his stock was because it was witchcraft. So he then wrote a book called Demonology, which he was having a conversation with this spirit. And from that moment on, that's when the witchcraft really took off, because James I wanted to...
Is that your tummy?
That is my
wow.
tummy. Yeah,
that's a witchcraft tummy going on there.
That's possessed. Yes, so it was James I, and there was the awful Witchfinder General, Matthew Hopkins. So that was when most witches were killed under Matthew Hopkins' reign of 3 or 4 years.
And do you know how many were killed? I mean, I've heard...
60% of all witches were killed of all witches ever killed, were killed within 3 years under Matthew Hopkins.
And what kind of numbers do you reckon?
There was one number claimed about sort of 5 years ago with some research of Wiccans, that's modern day witches in the UK, and it was 9 million across Europe.
Yeah, that's what I had heard as well, that it was millions and millions of women, and that the most preposterous thing, every time I've read how they would establish if the woman was a witch or not, it always resulted in her death if she wasn't a witch. So they'd tie her hands and legs together, chuck her in a lake, and say, well, if she lives, she's innocent. If she lives, she's a witch, and we'll kill her. And if she dies, she wasn't a witch. And of course, they'd all drowned. Inevitably, everybody had drowned. And so they'd go, yeah, she wasn't a witch. Shame she's not here anymore. You know, it was so bonkers, this logic of killing women this way. It's mental.
Yeah, and some of them weren't even, claimed witches. It's very, very upsetting, but it's a part of our history. But I feel as well, that the ancient traditions are coming from the Bronze Age, for example. And by the ancient traditions, I mean there was 8 sacred days in the Bronze Age calendar. And we're coming up to one of those, the summer solstice, because the summer solstice is on Monday, and here we are on the Friday having this interview.
And can I just say, you would never know. We're in England right now, not far from Avebury, and you would never know it's summer.
No.
So...
it's shocking. It's been raining and there was a thunderstorm last night. I
mean, no wonder they had to use astrology to tell them in England when it was summer. You would really need that in this country.
I agree fully. Yeah. So in the ancient Bronze Age, there were 8 sacred days, the summer solstice and the winter solstice, the autumn and the spring equinox, for example, and days in between those 4 times of the year, which was Beltane, which was May the 1st, as my stomach again.
As your witch, your inner witch.
Yeah, and Lammas of August the 1st, and Imbolc, February the 1st, and the start of the Celtic New Year was November the 1st, All Hallows Eve. So they were the 8 sacred days, and they were incorporated into most stone circles with solar alignments, for example. And it was the turning of the year in the ancient tradition, starting at Halloween, which was all of these dates became Christianized. So, for example, November the 1st, the Celtic New Year Day, was Christianized to All Saints. So each one of those days was Christianized and made into a festival. But in the ancient Bronze Age community, they were very special days. And Samhain, November the 1st, was very special because it was a time when you could attune to the ancestors. The veil between this world and the next grew thin. So if you went to a stone circle and you'd go on that alignment, that's where you could commune with time past, with the ancestors. And that's why today people dress up as skeletons and ghosts on Halloween. They're celebrating Samhain.
Getting in touch with the dead.
Getting in touch with the ancestors to find out, practical things. Is the summer going to reap a good harvest? It was quite practical things. But those 8 sacred days incorporated into stone circles became the 8 sacred Sabbats of the modern day witches. So those days and the knowledge of those days was never lost. It was handed down orally in country lore, folklore.
Wow.
And today we still know of them because modern day Druids and Wiccans still celebrate those days. You go to Avebury at any one of those days and you'll meet a group of people celebrating that fire festival, as they're known.
So 2 questions. What time period are we talking with the Bronze Age?
Bronze Age stone circle heyday was around about 2500 BC, if we're to believe the Orthodox dating system. Some people claim that they could be a lot older, they could go back to 10,000 BC. But if we use the evidence to date, it's 2500 BC is the height of the Bronze Age and the stone megalithic building program throughout Northwest Europe.
And the next question is, let's say we go way back. So right now we're 2500 BC. How is suddenly this certain day deemed to be this special sacred day? Like, how does that even happen suddenly? I mean, would there be an event on a day, or is it just they're looking at the stars and they see this certain interesting pattern on a certain day? How do you suddenly go, you know what, today, from now on, this is a special day?
Exactly, and that's a really good question. If we start at the spring equinox, for example, that's a fire festival, and then you go to the summer solstice. Exactly halfway between those 2 points, you get Beltane, May the 1st. It's halfway through that kind of cycle between the solstices and the equinoxes. Now, at Avebury Henge, that was incorporated in a spectacular way. That is a very visual thing to our ancient ancestors. If we imagine that Avebury has a stone circle inside
the biggest in the world.
The biggest in the world. It has a big outer circle of 100 standing stones. Inside of that 100 standing stone circle are 2 smaller stone circles, but still big by any measurement. They're 100 metres across, and you have a northern circle and a southern circle. Now, when William Stukely visited the site in 1724, he had one of those intuitive moments and said, I will deem the southern circle the Temple of the Sun, and I will deem the northern circle Temple of the Moon. And how prophetic his insight was, because it turned out that the central stone in the southern circle, William Stukely's Temple of the Sun, you have a massive, massive megalith. It got smashed, sadly, in William Stukely saw it being smashed in 1724. But in its heyday, it was 21 feet high by 8 feet broad. It was massive. Now, on those 8 days, and those 8 days alone, the shadow of that mighty megalith, that dark line cast by the rising sun on those days alone, would strike a particular stone, each on the day, announcing that fire festival date. So, for example, at Beltane, the shadow of the gigantic obelisk stone would cast its dark line and shadow and target one particular stone on that day at sunrise. And then at sunset on that particular day, Beltane, May the 1st, 2500 BC, it would cast a shadow the other way at sunset, closing the festival day. And that happened at eight days over the course of the year.
I mean, and sorry if this is like sounds a really silly question, but which sort of came first? I mean, did they put stones up and for whatever reason initially and discover, oh, look, this on these days makes the longest shadow, let's call these special days? Or did they already know and have decided these are special days, let's make the stones match up to these days kind of thing? Which came first? Which knowledge came first?
That's a really good question.
Thank God it's a good question.
And a question that loads of people ask when I take them out to Avebury and Stonehenge. And to be truthful, nobody really knows. But if we look to places like Stonehenge and we look to what's called not just the stones, but what went before the stones, and that was wooden post holes that held large wooden posts, for example, they marked out particular times of the year with either the lunar cycle or the solar cycle. So it could be that they were already plotting way, way before the stones were being put up. Do you see what I mean? With the preceding
kind of like practicing with wooden posts.
A practice run.
Before they get stones weighing hundreds of tons, let's get a few big logs and try it,
Yeah. So I think that they were doing wooden settings preceding the stone megalithic building phase, and they were very aware of that ancient time of the year anyway. So they were very good astronomers. They knew about the earth, so they were very good geomancers. And I think some of the earth currents that we were talking about earlier with the frequencies of the 25 hertz could have helped to manipulate, make the stone a little bit lighter. I don't think it would literally lift a huge rock up, but I think it would help. It would assist. And then they could move, because I studied archaeology with Bath Uni, with Wessex archaeologist Bob Clark. And one thing I always used to point out to the rest of the class that I was in, because they would say, oh, moving stone must have been difficult. I don't think it was in the ancient world, because that's the only thing they were doing really on a massive scale, moving stone. So moving stone clearly wasn't difficult to our ancient ancestors, because you look to all of the monuments and they were moving that. You go to other sites in other parts of the world and all you see is stone. So they knew how to move stone.
Yeah. I mean, we know, the frequency. Do you need a snack, by the way, with your tummy? Do you want to get a snack?
I might just have a banana, because I haven't
eaten today. Do you want to pause for a second and a banana? And we'll just remember that I was going to ask you about sound and the buildings, right? So go have a little snack.
Because I want my stomach's going to keep on whilst in line.
What is it with people showing up for interviews with rumbling tummies? Crichton Miller showed up with a rumbling tummy. And then we had all the crunching of the paper in the snack bar while he was having his interview. Wow. So Maria's got banana. So while you're eating your banana, I'll kind of try and verbalize my question. We know that sound affects matter. It can see through matter. For example, when we have our MRIs and our ultrasounds, we're literally looking through our body with sound frequencies, ultrasonic. Nikola Tesla got into trouble when he had a sound frequency machine that started to vibrate a building he was in, and the police came and he had to smash his machine because he was about to get into a lot of trouble with the police. I've even, in a podcast I listened to with Howard Hughes, he had an author who's written a book. I can't think of her name, but she wrote a whole book on how her theory was that sound could have been used to bring down the Twin Towers, that's how powerful sound is. Well, if sound can bring down a building, clearly it can have a big impact on the fabric of the building, i.e. the bricks and the stone and stuff. So it's not actually that big a stretch that a certain frequency of sound would alter the structure of the rocks enough that maybe they could be handled more easily, as you're saying, that they would have had a bigger understanding of frequency than we have now, or at least that most people have now. Do you sort of agree with that? I
do agree. And I think they were very aware of frequencies. And I think they were maybe not with our perception. We have an intellectual left brain perception of most things. I think possibly to our ancient ancestors, they were sensitized and they had a different perception to things. Whether that is the case, I can't say, but I think it probably is. Like I said, I think they could hear the sound of stones, and I think they had a different experience, because our senses today are predominantly sight and hearing, for example. But it's claimed by anthropologists that if you go back further in time, ancient mankind's predominant senses were smell and hearing, a bit like the animal kingdom.
Right.
And it's also claimed that at a certain point when they were crossing over for sight and hearing to become more dominant, that there could have been a crossover of sensory perception. So you could have smelt colour, heard colour. Your senses could have been crossing over as the dominant sense began to prevail, which is a very interesting concept and could have been around about the time of the Bronze Age, or it could have been much, much earlier. But I think we would been through that in our kind of sensory experience. So to the ancient ancestors, when they were looking at the movement of stone, creating these structures, I think they had sound in mind. And my next book, because I'm researching at the moment, the frequencies of earth energies. We think we've decoded the earth energies as sound. So that's where we're going now. But we've got a few more months of research, but we think we can give you a completely different look of an ancient site and possibly how ancient man could manipulate the earth energy and the sound of Gaia.
Oh, this is juicy. Maria, this is juicy. I demand a tidbit, a secret tidbit. Wow.
Well, what you said about, music is everything. That's what we think. Like I said, I'm not going to talk about that in this interview. That will be for another interview when we've got some more experiments. And we want to do a few things to say that this has some evidence behind it. Because what I write, people say, you're a mystic, Maria. I do have a mystical side, but I also have a very practical side. I'm very grounded.
Right.
So I do like to prove things rather than saying, I have a belief system, believe in a lay.
Right.
I like to say, okay, people have said there's lays. Let's go out there. Let's douse it because I am a sensitive. But then how can we prove this to the rest of society?
See, I feel a big similarity with you here because I had my experience, which was, just completely, literally out of this world. And it was so much information came to me in that experience. It was a bit like getting a diploma, but not having actually gone to the college. So I have this information now, but I now research to try and share it with people and, of course, shed more light on it myself. But I can appreciate what you're saying, that you're not just going on your instincts. You're scientifically proving things as you go along with technical instruments and, you said a word earlier in the interview to do with the stones, and it's a word that means something to me. When you were talking about the rocks, and you said they have this matrix structure. Now, part of my research is, during my experience, my body disappeared. I just became a point of awareness. But in front of me, I saw an infinite grid of flawlessly aligned energy balls. Absolutely flawless, as though it had been aligned by a software program. It was so perfect. And so I started to try, and I've been Googling to oblivion, like lattices. And one of the first things that I came up with back in 2012 was that crystals have this flawless energy structure. And I looked at a whole bunch of structures of, quartz and different ones. Some of them slant, they skew like calcite. It's kind of on a tilt. And some of them are like squares, which was what I saw was very much cubic. Do you know what sort of structures the stones have? And is that what you're referring to with a matrix, perhaps?
Absolutely. It's like a crystal matrix structure, which is believed the type of stone at Avebury, and which makes up the very large stones at Stonehenge, is called a sarsen stone. It's a local stone. It was a glacial deposit when the ancient ancestors would find these deposits and then transport them from a point, for example, to get the sarsen stone to Stonehenge, that's 17 miles. And incidentally, you have to go up a massive, massive hill, 700 meters above sea level, is in the way between Avebury deposits of stones and Stonehenge.
Wow.
So they're probably more on a slant, the matrix system of the sarsen stone, because it's silicon. A lot of silicon you find in sarsen stone, and deposits of iron and deposits of crystal as well. So yes, and all of that is a fantastic generator for electromagnetic energy, especially the iron deposits that you often get. And the ancients looked. Next time you go to Avebury, and any listener that goes to Avebury, have a look at some of the stones, because they do have an iron coat. It makes them a kind of reddish rusty hue about them. Very, very beautiful stones. And that's because they have that kind of deposit in them. Same as the stones at Stanton Drew. That's the second largest stone circle. It's in Somerset, not far from Glastonbury Tor. And that has beautiful pinkish stones. And that's all rich iron on the inside of those stones.
Do you know offhand of any particular crystals that have that lattice structure, that sort of square cubic lattice structure of their molecules?
No, not offhand, because I've just looked at kind of the stones around the megalithic sites. But there could possibly be one. That would probably take some research for you to do, because you've seen it, and I expect it's out there in something.
And you say they're like an amplifier. And I know when I was at Stonehenge, maybe it was even yourself or James Swagger that said they found medical implements at the stone circle indicating surgeries, sort of ancient surgery, like a brain surgery, for example?
Yeah, that was my work that I spoke on Capricorn Radio about to James. Yes, you see, Stonehenge was not an isolated monument. People think it is. Now imagine back in the heyday, back in the day, as they say, 2500 BC, Stonehenge was surrounded by 800 round barrows.
And a barrow, as I've learned from your tour, it looks like a mound of a hill, and it kind of looks like it might be to do with burial.
Some are, some aren't, exactly. So you're right, then that was a good description for the listeners. They're kind of like mounds, like hills. There was 800 surrounding Stonehenge alone.
What was in them?
Well, some were for burials and others weren't. Some are very enigmatic. And they were all finished off in chalk. So they would have been gleaming, chalk white, ringing 2 concentric rings around Stonehenge, with Stonehenge in the centre. And 800 is quite a good number, because that's the amount of stars visible with the naked eye. So perhaps it was a massive star planetarium surrounding Stonehenge, has yet to be established. But in some of those mounds, I was investigating them and found that some of these skulls quite close to Stonehenge had clear evidence of being what's called trepanned, and that's having a circle cut out of the skull.
Wow.
Now, the archaeologists from the 80s onwards always said, it was a shamanic ritual because the person was epileptic or could have been, possessed. It had to have a ritual significance. Well, the evidence was reevaluated by a curator of Devizes Museum, and Devizes Museum is the nearest museum to Avebury Henge, not far from my hometown of Marlborough. And it was reevaluated. And it was then thought, no, it wasn't shamanic. It was not ritualistic at all. It was probably removing a brain tumour.
Wow.
So that's how advanced their surgical practices were. Then I decided to investigate some of the other barrows, some distance from Stonehenge, but as the crow flies, not that far, say 4 miles to the south of Stonehenge. And I found what looked like a surgical instrument. I actually took a picture of it to my local doctors, because I just happened to be going down there with my young daughter at the time, and said, "What do you think that is?" And he just kind of smiled, because it was a bit random and out of the blue. And he said, "It looks like a surgical instrument that you would use." So I thought, well, that could have been used for the brain surgery. But when I spoke to the archaeologists about this implement, this possible surgical instrument, they said it was a pin to put a brooch into a cloak.
Oh.
So that was their interpretation of it. But you show that to a medical qualified doctor, and they did not say it was a pin for a brooch for a big cloak.
Right, because it's specific knowledge that would take a specifically trained eye to recognize, a surgical instrument. That makes sense to me. Now, here's the question, not to sound like a roaring skeptic, but did they find any of these remains of the skulls where, let's say, they'd had the circle cut out, but then it had been successful, so they found them buried normally with their skull re-intact, or did they only find the skulls with the holes as though kind of they tried to do an operation and it failed?
Well, yes, that's good, because there was evidence for that. And there was evidence for that some had healed, because you have muscles growing over any surgery that you've had. Your body will repair over that. And there was evidence for that. But there was evidence as well for some people that didn't survive that operation. But when we look to our own medical practices, you're going to get an operation that is very successful. And you're also going to have operations that, for one reason or another, fail. And it was no different in the Neolithic and Bronze Age period of Stonehenge. So I think Stonehenge was a place where people would come for healing experiences, because there are not that many trepanned skulls anywhere else in the UK.
Wow.
There's not to say that's the only place. Just because something hasn't been discovered, it could be in barrows that have been unexcavated around the Avebury area. But if we look for the documentation to date, the surgery happened around Stonehenge and Stonehenge alone.
Wow. I mean, it's just incredible to think of brain surgery happening, 25,000 BC or 2,500 BC? 2,500 BC. 2,500 BC. So 4,500 years ago-ish. Wow. And with the amplification, this jogged my memory, what I was thinking of earlier is when you said the stones have the crystals and the composite that amplifies, then you think that they would do these surgeries within the stone circles so that the healing could be amplified somehow. Do you think?
I think around the perimeters of Stonehenge were other buildings, wooden buildings. Again, we're looking at Stonehenge through our own understanding. But in an archaeological sense, there was at one time a wooden building in front of Stonehenge. There were structures around Stonehenge. And also, today, when you drive past Stonehenge on the A303, you can clearly see the stones. Yep.
Yes.
Any driver could go past. That's not the experience of the ancient world. And I pointed this out to James Swagger and others. Stonehenge was surrounded by a very large what's called a henge, which is a bank that was 10 feet high. You could not see who was on the inside of Stonehenge back in the day.
Like a bank of earth, like a
chalk,
hill kind of? Chalk.
A white chalk, big round structure surrounded Stonehenge, 6 to 10 feet high. So all you could see is the top of the very large stones. You wouldn't see who was in there, what was happening in there. It was a very exclusive place.
Yeah. It's interesting that you say about chalk as well, because the first things that spring into mind is that chalk kind of has this dual property of white chalk being reflective, but also absorbent, because it's chalk. And I'm sure, given that, if people are doing brain surgeries, I'm sure that wasn't an arbitrary decision to use chalk. Why do you think they would use white chalk? I mean, could it have just been cosmetic because it looked nice and shiny? Or do you think there was a property to it that would somehow keep the resonances within the circle, the confines of the circle?
I'll answer that in 2 stages. The first stage in southern England, beneath literally, or say 2 inches beneath the grass, is chalk. It's massive chalk bedrock, just like the White Cliffs of Dover. That's where the chalk beds start. They came out from the bottom of the seas when the Alps were being made by Mother Nature. So they once the seabeds chalk, and it was risen up. So that's quite practical. You use your practical.
You just got lots of it.
We got lots of it here. But that said, there was a researcher and author called John Burke, and he looked into the properties of magnetism at stone circles, the pyramids, Easter Island. He was on an odyssey himself to discover what was going on at these ancient sites. And he used, a bit like myself, equipment. Now, what he noticed about Stonehenge and henge monuments was chalk can carry a signal because there's water beneath the chalk. Yeah, it's like a fantastic filter for water in this area. So it can charge up and create an electromagnetic signal because of the water beneath. Water is a good conductor. Electricity will flow through water like it will through metal. And what he found was the opening, the gap that you get in a henge monument where everybody walks through, basically, it's called a processional way or a causeway, is where you'd walk through. So all henges have a few gaps, like little gateways, if you will, where people walk in. What he noticed was in his studies was that's where all of the electromagnetic signals were being guided into the monument, because where the chalk wall was put round, it would flow around that and then through the open causeways. He went on to think, well, why? Why was this? And his take was that if you placed a seed, like a wheat seed, on top of a mound of chalk, or you place that into a henge monument, like at the centre of Stonehenge or the centre of Avebury, what he proved categorically was it increased fertility. You then plant that seed into the ground, and it would grow twice as fast and twice as strong within the electromagnetic field. He conducted some very serious experiments. He has a fantastic book called Seed of Knowledge, Stone of Plenty. I'm plugging his book instead of mine. I'll plug that later.
I'll plug your book.
And he proved this because he did controls, just like in my experience, you do a control. So you take some seed, let's, for an argument's sake, put it inside Stonehenge, take a control, and then he grew them. So he said this is what they were doing. They were increasing fertility.
I mean, just, myself, my gut feeling is there's no way that it was out of convenience. If you're saying they bought those stones 17 miles up a hill that's 700 feet, these people aren't about convenience. No. If it was about convenience, the stones themselves would have been made out of more local materials, or they would have just kept making them out of wood. So convenience wasn't an issue. It was some sort of energetic properties was what they were after. So it seems to me that the chalk would have been of significance.
Absolutely, and I agree. And I just like to add to that, that's the large stones came 70 miles. The smaller blue stones inside of Stonehenge came 170 miles from the Preseli Mountains. Interesting fact, they are 3 times more magnetic than any other stone in the British Isles.
Whoa.
So that's why they went to Stonehenge. Whoa. Stonehenge was a beautiful, beautiful monument. It's one thing I've always pointed out because I did radio interviews like with you, and suddenly I was talking to an American audience and I thought, that's your perception of Stonehenge. And I realised it's everybody's perception of Stonehenge. We see them as being very grey.
Oh, yeah.
That's
old.
Not, a bit like me. But what it was in antiquity, they were so highly polished, the sarsen stones, they looked like silver.
Like a granite, right? Because, I mean, don't you also have kitchen countertops made of kind of similar stones that are granites that have crystal in them and stuff? Yeah. And we see them on our kitchens, highly polished,
And the blue stones on the inside, that was a fantastic analogy of the kitchen tops. Everyone can now relate to that because the blue stones on the inside were that highly polished. They are dark midnight blue with specks of feldspar, like a star-spangled sky. Yeah. That's the blue stones. And then you would step inside the sanctity of the stone circle and the altar stone. Today it's fallen beneath another stone. But that bejeweled Stonehenge, it was a sandstone green with flexes of red garnet. Stonehenge was a beauty unto itself.
Right, like an art installation, it sounds like.
It was beautiful.
Yeah, I think it's easy to forget that when we go to sacred sites of what it was intentioned to look like. We see these run-down, fallen over, haggard bits of rock, dare I say. But at the time, if they were all these beautiful polished things, and we don't even know what might have been inscribed on them that's eroded off. I mean, I happened to walk through a cemetery the other day, locally in Buckinghamshire, and the stones, I noticed there was no names on the stones anymore, which I thought, wow, that's kind of a shame. You can't see the name of the person, but you could barely make out the date, and it was 200 years ago. So in 200 years only, we have lost the wording on a lot of cemetery stones. So what might have been on those stones at Stonehenge, from 2500 BC, there might have been all kinds of inscriptions on those stones. Maybe.
There are some surviving examples. On the inside of Stonehenge, you have axes carved on, axe heads, carvings onto the stones which have survived just. There were some other very intriguing inscriptions on the Stonehenge stones. One of a possible headless body was carved on there. I went to look for them the other day. I was on a private tour with a gentleman from Sweden, and we were really looking for all of these figures, and they have, like you say, they have disappeared. And it's very interesting. So there were carvings on Stonehenge. Yeah. A lot of the main research is done into axe heads, which were figured in the Bronze Age, but there were figurines possibly at Stonehenge. And when I was on a trip with Megalithic Odyssey with James Swagger, we've recently been to Sardinia, to some fantastic sites there. And one very strange carving that drew my attention at one place in Sardinia was a kind of half like humanoid, but like a grey alien carved into Sardinia. So why that was there, again, needs to be established. But at Stonehenge, there was also other artifacts mentioned in antiquity, probably around 1700s.
Now, I would guess people, if they saw this inscription of a headless body, a lot of people, I would bet money, their perception of Stonehenge would be like, oh, druid, barbarian people probably chopping off heads. But from what I'm sort of perceiving, to me, the message is almost like enlightenment. It's literally like you lose your mind and connect with higher consciousnesses or something. You know, I think that's really fascinating, the idea of an inscription of a headless body, what that could mean.
Yeah, exactly. That's lost now. It's underneath a lot of kind of like moss-like substance. So that sadly cannot be seen today.
What do you think that would mean?
What I think it could mean, I think it could have multi-meanings. One meaning, I think it could represent the kind of different types of surgery there that could have been done. It could have been a surgical symbol motif. It could have been representing, you know, like you say, something to do with higher consciousness, because for certain people that go to Stonehenge and really do attune and have a quiet moment within the sanctity of the stone circle do come out feeling different. Something has changed in their consciousness. Ancient sites trigger something within our DNA, within our ancient memory bank. So we leave the site feeling a little bit different. And that's why people come to these places. They're drawn. People don't randomly, well, some people might randomly go to Stonehenge, but a lot of people that I meet as a tour guide and author, they are drawn to these places. And then it changes them on some level, which is always very interesting.
So I'm just recapping on the distances of the stones. The big Sarsens was 7 miles. And
17.
17. So the 17. And then the blue stones that are the outer ones, 170, did you say? I mean, do you think there's a significance, or is that totally random coincidence, the distance of the 1717?
Well, there was also there's the blue stones at Stonehenge. There's 4 different types of blue stones. It's just we coined the phrase blue stones. And there was one place called Carn Godog, which is 120 miles away. But the furthest deposit of the blue stones was 170 miles away. And again, like I used to say to my old group at Bath studying, you know, it wasn't a problem. Now, if that was a problem to move stones all that distance, they wouldn't have moved them.
That's right.
And then you'd get the archaeologists under people going back to the 1950s. Richard Atkinson, he was a very famous Stonehenge archaeologist, and he made a whole model, and he actually proved it, how you could move a blue stone from Wales to Stonehenge by using logs. You'd roll a log along, and then you'd be moving the kind of rollers along.
Right.
But, okay, and he moved a blue stone, not very far, because it was problematic, but he moved it nonetheless. Now, so you could say, is that model real or not? If you go to a stone circle on the Western Outer Hebrides for Scotland, the Western Isles, then you go to Callanish, wonderful, wonderful stone circle with the most spectacular lunar alignment ever integrated into a stone circle in England and Scotland and Wales and Ireland. What's really interesting there is there's no trees. So how did they move the stones without the logs?
But then maybe there could have been trees?
No, it's never been. It's so windswept. The trees actually just don't grow there.
I mean, Crichton Miller, this might be another point where you guys have the differing opinion. He believes everything was moved by water, and that back then there was a lot more, the water levels were higher, and they would have literally had their boats and stuck the stones on boats and brought them to the sites via waterways.
Oh, absolutely. He's right there. Any archaeologist would say to you in the Neolithic period, from 3000 BC onwards to the Iron Age, there was much more water, and there could have been ports where there aren't ports now, which are more inland. And certainly you'd be utilizing that. Mankind utilizes anything to give himself an easier life.
Right.
You know, like if it's easier to get in your car, you get in your car rather than go on a train.
Right.
So I do think to a certain degree that is right. You would have moved a lot around, but I don't think it is the overall answer to moving stone everywhere, because you're looking at the major stone circles like Avebury, like Stonehenge, but in between all those sites are mini stone circles. So you have 900 surviving stone circles in the British Isles alone. There was probably thousands that have been lost, and there's some on private property not far from where we're sat now. And so a very inland, away from any major river of antiquity, for example. So that doesn't answer. At some point, they must have moved the stone across land at some point, even if they did have a port very close to Stonehenge. One of the avenues at Stonehenge does lead to the River Avon. At West Amesbury, for example, the avenue at Stanton Drew leads to the River Chew, and a very small brook at Avebury, which could have been a larger river in the Neolithic and Bronze Age, but I don't think it's an overall answer.
Well, here's what is burning in my mind as well, is there's rocks and stones all over the place. If you've already got some stones you're using from 17 miles away, why go all that other distance to get this specific stone that's got this certain, amplification property? And how would they even know that? They wouldn't have had EMF readers. How would they know that these stones are amplifying at different levels?
That is a fantastic question.
That is a mofo question.
It is. That's what really fascinates me. How did the ancient ancestors know about these frequencies? How did the ancient ancestors differentiate between different particular stones?
Right.
And they did. So you take a stone circle like Boscawen went on in Cornwall, and that has a quartz stone at a particular angle. And the other stones are different. Do you see what I mean? So they were looking at stones, and they must have known the metaphysical and the physical properties of these stones, and how that they knew that is the $1 million question.
Right.
But they did. We know that because they selected those stones. There are different stones in the area, much closer to Stonehenge, that could have been utilised rather than going all the way to the Preseli Mountains and possibly now Snowdonia, according to the latest research coming out of UCL London. They think it could have been as far away as Snowdonia.
Snowdonia? Where's Snowdonia? It sounds adorable.
You go there. It's a wonderful place, but it's a little bit further from the Preseli Mountains for the bluestone deposits. They think there's another deposit further away, heading towards North Wales, which could be more than 170 miles away, called Snowdonia. And that's where... So they were selecting these mountainous stones.
And it was such a specific selection. Now, part of my research, what I found very quickly, having received this message that sound is everything and music is the key, I immediately was researching sound healing, and I got a set of tuning forks and very quickly learned that the different intervals between two frequencies, two musical frequencies or two sounds, has a very profound effect on the human body. Literally, science has shown that if you play two tones that are 5 intervals away, like do, re, mi, fa, so.
Yeah.
If you take 5 of them, like C, D, E, F, G, C, G, and you play those at the same time, that's a 5th interval. Your body, well, at the interval of the 5th, your body releases nitric oxide. John Beaulieu, who's a sound healer researcher, he has a great book called Human Tuning. And he showed, and his studies showed, that when the human body is exposed to the interval of the 5th, your body releases nitric oxide. And it's very healthy for the body. It literally goes through your blood and cleans up debris. It's like a little police patrol going through your arteries. It's very good for the body. So I'm wondering, and of course all the other intervals, that's the interval of the fifth. Well, intervals of the fourth and the sixth apparently have effects on human consciousness. They put you in very receptive states for meditation, for example. Well, I'm wondering the sarsen frequency and then the surrounding bluestone frequency, what would be the interval difference? Has anybody
That's
explored?
what we've looked into.
And do you know what it is, what the actual number differences are?
Yeah, that's what we're doing for our next
That's
book.
for your next book. Oh, so that's going to be amazing.
We have looked into the music, but not music as the standard expression of it, but the Earth's expression. So we've looked into particular energy patterns that were incorporated into ancient sites, such as what's called a geospiral. And we've looked into how that relates to the spiral of fifth and the different intervals that would happen and what would that be used for apart from healing. So we've looked into it on a different level as well as healing, which is quite widely known. But we think that the ancient ancestors were up to something a little bit more than that, where we must have a chat about when that book's out.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think altered states is another big area with sound and with these intervals. So I can't wait for you to, publicize what you learn. And my natural curiosity is like, okay, if it happened to be a fifth, it would definitely indicate some sort of a healing property. But if it, let's say, was a sixth or something like that, it would indicate to me that people would go there for some sort of enlightenment to connect to a higher state of consciousness, or maybe you could kind of move yourself around Stonehenge and experience different frequencies and kind of go on a ride of frequencies.
See, it's like the Earth song. If we think of, lays and earth energies that were describing earlier, all with their different frequencies, it's like an Earth song. And this Earth song that Gaia can release, it's like her silent voice, if you will, expressed as musical harmonics or intervals like that. You can tap into a broader understanding of where you are on the planet as well, because you're becoming a part of the Earth song.
You feel connected.
Yeah, and I feel that when we look to some indigenous cultures, such as the Aborigines, they would follow song lines and they see the Earth a little bit differently through their eyes than through our eyes. And again, I think our understanding is being too left brain. We're trying to always intellectualize. It must have a meaning. It must have this meaning. It must have that. So wouldn't it be wonderful if, people's experiences of what they experience becomes more of a powerful way of understanding an ancient site than an author that writes about the astronomical alignments or something. So that's what we've done. We've set up different experiments with people to see the experience as much as the maths or much as the left brain. We're looking into the kind of understanding, the experience that something gives you with no predetermined, you're going to experience this. Go to this point in the Earth. What do you experience? Go to that point in the Earth. And what is your experience? And if more and more people have similar experiences over particular points of the particular types of Earth energy naturally emitted by Mother Earth, then you can start to say, well, that's in all probability, that's a standard, experience to a certain degree.
Wow.
The subjective experience is equally as powerful as the objective. Because when I take people out to stone circles as well, I can be very left brain. I know all the archaeology. I know about dates and the archaeologists, and I know about the astronomical alignments. I've discovered astronomical alignments at Avebury, for example. Take all of that away and all the maths and all the geomancy and the sacred geometry. People just like to say, I feel differently. It's their experience that is far more powerful at the end of the day. And I think that's when people used to go to these ancient sites. That was a very important role, as much as the astronomer priests that created these arenas for different things to occur.
Have I remembered correctly from your tour that you said, and it might not be yourself, that there was artifacts, jewels found, like beads and stuff from Egypt?
That's right, I did say that.
And it indicated that kind of maybe there was sort of a tourism going on way back to come to Stonehenge.
Absolutely. There was. Around the Stonehenge environs, you had beads from ancient Egypt to the contemporary date. So that's around about 2500 BC.
Wow.
You had jet from the Baltics. You had amber from the Czech Republic.
Wow.
Bohemia, as it used to be called. People were from all over the known world were coming to the Stonehenge and Avebury environs. The evidence is clear. It's in the landscape. Now, if you follow a straight line down from Stonehenge at a place called Winterbourne, it's called Crossroads these days because there's a new roundabout put there. But if we just go back to an ancient time, and there's a straight line from that today's roundabout going all the way down, that's a lay, and that would take you to a port called Christchurch. So I'm sure that the ancient port there at Christchurch, you just come up in the straight line. When I was involved in archaeological you go, some archaeologists like you to what's called field walk, and you look for shards and you look for different things. It's always a bit of an indicator of what was going on. And I was with Wessex Archaeology, Bob Clark, looking for shards at that place, Winterbourne Stoke Crossroads. And I was talking to him about, what was it like back in the day? And he said, well, there's this straight line. He said, I'm not going to call it a lay, Maria. It's a straight line. It's a straight line alone. But it was fenced each side like a road. So that went on for quite some distance, just like we have hedgerows today around some roads that you would travel to get here today.
Like how far?
Well, they've only excavated about intervals for a mile. So whether that went all the way to Christchurch is yet to be established. But nonetheless, that would be a really quick route to get from Christchurch on the south port right away up to Stonehenge.
I mean, it just sounds like our ancestors were hopping. Like they weren't just sort of in their little villages for their whole entire lives, like we might have been led to believe in our upbringing in school, in our history books. Here's our little people in their little dark, boring-looking brown clothes that they wore, And in fact, they're traveling, they're building interesting thuld that even we don't understand the intelligence behind these structures, and we're still learning. I mean, how would somebody in Egypt even hear about Stonehenge in 2500 BC?
John Michel, he points out in one of his books, actually, which is very interesting. We always think that, everything came from the east and it came to the west. So things started off in Sumer and Egypt, and the natural timeline was it would eventually get to the backwaters of Britain. Yeah. But John Michel, in his own understanding and his own research, pointed out that Pythagoras, and we all know about Pythagoras, he needs no introduction from our school days. It's a person that we know was at the height of his intellectuality at that time. He was taught by the Druids.
What time
England.
Frame was he?
Well, he was a Greek. He was a Greek, mathematician and philosopher. So my point is, the people of the British Isles were not a backwater. They were influencing different people at different points in time. So I think that our way of life, our culture, could have influenced other cultures like Egypt. Like Egypt could have influenced our culture. But I think it was more of a cosmopolitan environment than we give it credit for. The ancient Egyptians had their way. Well, today they still do. And we have our way. But I think there was a big coming together. And I've just thought as well, we're in a place called Marlborough. That's not that far from Avebury. There was a recent archaeological dig here done about 4 years ago, and they found a large road. Yeah. And they thought, wow, the Romans are famous for building roads in England. Not so. It was a Neolithic road contemporary to Avebury and Stonehenge, and it was bigger than the average A road that you travel on today.
Wow.
Clearly, our ancient ancestors were not just using water, they were building roads. And this road either side, a bit like what the Romans did, had a for runoff water to keep it water free. So they were making
wow.
roads. It wasn't just all moving around with water. Look to the
Right.
evidence in the landscape, and the landscape is very clear. And it shocked them because they would much rather see them sailing down in a boat down the river Kennet, which is nearby, rather than constructing all of these large roads. And they think that road went all the way from Avebury to Stonehenge.
Wow.
Now, if that's just one road, of course it's beneath the ground by, 4 or 5 meters these days. How many other roads are lost and they have yet to be discovered? Did ancient Britain have an intersecting road network just like we have today? I think it did. And I think it went across Europe just like the old silk trade roads did. I think that's how people traveled, by sea and by land, not one or the other, both.
Wow. And sorry if somehow this went over my head, but why did you bring up Pythagoras in this?
I was wanting to point out to the listeners that we think that a lot of the intellectual concepts came from the East and influenced the West. What I'm saying is the intellectual concepts, the Druids were renowned to know the size of the earth, and they went to ancient Greece and taught Pythagoras. Wow. So we are seen as a backwater ancient Britain, but it wasn't. I think it was an influential, cultural, intellectual power base that was influencing the ancient world, just like how Greece influenced the ancient world and how Egypt has influenced the ancient world and other places besides.
And what specifically makes you, I've only come across Pythagoras a lot because of all the sound, musical interval stuff and the harmonics and everything. What makes you specifically think that the British culture at the time would have influenced him in Greece, ancient Greece?
Because according to John Michel's research, there was written evidence that happened. It was a historical fact. That's what he claims. And I'm sure that, his research is second to none. He was one of the most prolific writers on all things mystical and stone circles from the 1960s till his recent death.
So Pythagoras became the name that everybody remembered, but he might have had some buddies from...
He did. He was taught
ancient
by the
Britain,
Druids.
From Druids.
From the ancient Britain.
Okay.
The Druids, they were very learned. They weren't savages. They didn't go around killing people. That's how the Romans depicted us, because they were the victors. They could say, that you're a bunch of barbarians. In ancient Rome, women were second-class citizens. In ancient Britain, in the Celtic times, you had Queen Boudica. Women were respected and they were powerful. We had a different culture, and they didn't like our culture because when they came here, they thought, oh my gosh, women with power? Queen Boudica?
Well, in Egypt, it was the female. Female. Would they still be called a pharaoh if it was a woman?
I'm not sure of the technical term, to be truthful. A pharaoh.
Yeah. So I know we have to wrap up now. I can't wait for your book to come out. When do you think this new book is going to come out?
If given the right workload, I hope that should be out within 6 to 7 months.
Okay. Have you got a title for it?
We have a working title, whether it's going to be that title or not, but it's going to be called From Stonehenge to Serpent Mound.
Oh, okay. Stonehenge to Serpent Mound. Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Maria, for taking time out of your incredibly busy schedule, globetrotting, sharing all of your knowledge and wisdom. It's awesome to talk with you, and I hope we get to do it again soon.
Thank you.
Maria Wheatley, thank you again. She's just so full of knowledge, and if you go to Amazon, there's even more proof of her wonder. Like the book that just came out this year, Druidic Soul Star Astrology, a new way to discover your past lives without past life regressions. How does that work? I want to know. Druid Soul Star Astrology. How cool is that? Divining ancient sites, insights into their creation. Wow, she's just so prolific. There's a lot of stuff on Amazon that Maria has written. So I have a feeling that book did change title, but you can look deeper. Go to mariawheatley.com for all things Maria. Like, you can take a tour with her around Stonehenge or Avebury. You can go study at her esoteric school. That's about it. Thank you. Have amazing frequencies and vibrations in your imminent future. Make it happen. Think of them. Think of the perfect fifth. If you play music, play the perfect fifth. Get those intervals. See how it makes you feel. See what it does. I look forward to being back soon. So be well, people, and I'll catch you next time on The Grey Escape.